Luke, welcome to the fun2000.com real estate podcast. Uh, for the audience, my name is Chuck and Ham, and this is Luke Erickson, a friend, real estate agent, and one of the funniest guys I know.
Wow. Well, thank you for that introduction. Wow, long-time listener, first-time caller. That's what I want to open with.
I love it.
It's good to be on the podcast. I've only listened to one or two episodes, so I'm fairly fresh to the industry. So I don't know what I should be listening to. Maybe you have some good podcast recommendations after this. We'll go into it at the
Yeah.
end.
And just so the audience is aware, Luke and I have not discussed any of this. I told him that I want to discuss today. So our topic for today is homeowners associations, HOAs. And the reasoning is because so many homes, especially newer homes, they're all getting built with, I shouldn't say all of them. What do you think, Luke? There's a huge percentage of homes with
I think
HOAs, right?
I feel like it's become the new normal, at least here in California. I feel like outside of California, it's not as common. But yeah, here I feel like for the most part, everything comes with an HOA attached or some sort of community.
Yeah. I live in an HOA. Is your property in an HOA as well?
I do. I actually, from the homework assigned, I did some, I didn't know. So this is how little I'm involved in my own HOA. I'm not at all. Like I don't even look at the notices they send me. And occasionally they're pertinent. So like we're going to trim the trees or something, but all of that is in direct correlation of the reserve study. So,
Yep.
it was kind of wild to read about. I mean, I know there was a lot of financial impact around HOAs and some of that, but I guess I didn't until I read the homework or the reserve study guidelines that you provided. I don't think I understood the both the impact and the value on both the property, like my own property, but as well as the whole community's property, like the value of having the reserve study and sort of the need to also be accountable for those, like so just timely, very timely, because for example, we have a pool. I mean, I don't know if your HOA has a pool, but our pool had it's only been around for about 8 years, but now they're talking about redoing it, and they literally just started. So like
Redoing it
maybe
how, like the plaster or what?
so the plaster on the inside of the pool went bad, and of course they're using HOA fees. And in point of fact, as a now that I'm a little more involved in real estate, maybe shame on me that I wasn't more familiar with this, but from the regular standard consumer, I don't think no, like I want to say 90% of my HOA have no idea that this is a thing that exists or that they could even go get it. So, that's the other thing is it was interesting to think about the barrier to entry of just a regular person who, like it's important. Reserve study is important, I think, or even the guidelines sort of outlines, some interesting reasons why you should do it. Um, but it's important for your property value as well as it's appealing. So on a, like on a two front, one, if you're an owner, I care about my property value, and so I want to make sure that's maintained, and I have a good property value if if the reserve study is done and we're continuing to maintain those shared community areas. And so it was interesting to think about. But then on the flip side, like the same thing is it's a value to a buyer as well. Like it's another selling point
Well,
of
and that's one of the things I want to jump into because um, as a buyer, how do you know? How do you know the financial strength or the stability of your HOA? Well, you that's what we're discussing today is there's a document and it's called a reserve study, and you can get the summary of what happened with that reserve study on that first page. Have you seen a reserve study yet?
So I did. I went actually, and I went to find mine
Okay,
because
good.
I was like, oh, I have an HOA. And oh man, it felt like I had to jump through some hoops, but it was available digitally. Thank you for technology.
Mhm.
I was reading in the reserve study guidelines where it said sometimes they don't have to perform, they don't have to send you the full report. They'll make a physical copy available at the office. What a hassle. But they didn't do any of that
Mhm.
for me. I was able to pull down the full report and it can show me, they did a physical assessment and they talked about, they show me literally budgeting and numbers, which is
Mhm.
great.
Mhm.
It's one of the things I didn't think about as a future seller. If you were selling your house, this would be something you'd want to put on there, that, this is something that's regularly maintained and um, that was the other thing is as I was reading this stuff and sort of as I pulled the report, I was thinking, how do you convey that though? On the flip side, so like I apologize, I feel like we're jumping around to all these different perspectives. Like
That's
I
okay.
talked to you
We're going to
about
summarize here shortly too.
right. I talked to you about the property owner perspective, where you are a property owner, and this is something that you should be looking for, for your HOA and make sure they're doing. And I mean, it's legal code
Mhm.
1365. So this it's also, but it's valuable to you because it keeps your property values. It's another addition for your property values and maintains it, and
Well,
that's good.
you asked the question, how do you convey that? What do you mean?
Well, so flipping to let's say you're a real estate agent, right? Let's just pretend whatever, like because I like to look at everybody's angle. And so I feel like as a real estate agent, so taking off my owner's hat, let's put on the real estate hat. Just a random guy named Luke approached me. I know my name's Luke, so it's a real weird, it's like inception of people, but Luke approaches me in this community and he's like, I want to sell my house and I've got here's a reserve study.
Right.
How do I convey that to people who are out there, because that's the other thing, you know, knowledge, like a regular consumer. As I started, I talked about how I feel like 90% of my HOA has no idea what a reserve study is
Well,
or the
that's
value to it.
so how
So,
do we convey that? How does that information get out, in other words, right?
well, sort of, how do you convey that it's a value, without I feel like everything in sales has got to be quick and people got to understand pretty quickly. And I had to read about 10 pages before I understood about like the value of reserve study. It's a little buried in the guidelines,
Yeah.
but I get it. There's some legalese going on, and the guidelines are put forth from the real estate. So on the real estate side of things, from the DRE, it's these are their recommended guidelines for these
Well,
studies.
I think we ought to back up a little bit and just say, how does this information get out in the first place? Because people, like you say, don't understand this information exists. And not only that, they're entitled to it. So if you were a purchaser of a unit in a condo or a prospective purchaser, and not a condo, but you live in a single family house, it's a planned urban development. So you don't have shared walls, but you do have a swimming pool. So you have a common area interest. And because there's going to be common area, you're entitled to know what you're buying. You're going to have an interest in that common area. So, like you say, the civil code, this is part of the Davis-Sterling Act. It requires the disclosure of these kind of things like the reserve study. Now, the reserve study, the HOAs are supposed to get one of these done every single year. It's possible for them to only get a site inspection every other year, and the reserve study can be recertified on the alternating years, on the off years. So um, you don't, as an owner, you usually don't have, like you say, most people aren't even aware. They don't keep reserve studies in their back pocket. And when they decide to sell, they're not going to have that in their file either. So it's going to be the duty of the real estate agent and also escrow to obtain that reserve study. But it will be in the contract. So, Luke, when you, as real estate agent Luke, help buyer or seller Luke, whichever, I can't remember if you were buyers.
It was a terrible original idea. We'll just call
Well,
him Joe Bob, something easier.
I
Joe
like
Bob selling to
no,
Luke.
I like the
Uh,
Luke and the Luke. So when Luke and Luke are helping each other,
right,
um, it Luke's going to make sure that it's in the agreement. So real estate agent Luke's going to make sure that it's in the agreement just because it's there by
sure.
default. And it's there by default that the HOA disclosure should be delivered within a certain period of time. Otherwise, buyer Luke, let's just make them all Luke. How about that? Um,
Wow, we've got three Lukes. It is Lukeception out there. Watch out. All right, so buyer Luke comes along.
Yeah, so buyer Luke or any buyer is entitled to review that HOA document. And now here's the interesting thing. Even though it's all in the agreement, just like seller Luke and all other individuals out there, I should say a percentage of all these individuals, even real estate agents and even their clients at this stage of the game never read the reserve study. What do you think?
Yes, I would say, even after I pulled my reserve study, it's a little like you got to be ready with an accounting degree somewhat to understand what's going on. I mean, thankfully I took accounting 101, so I understand some of the concepts, but it's a little intense. And so I can understand why, well, it may be just a
Well, what's
function
going
of
on? What's
today's
going on with the
owner.
reserve study? What's like the executive summary of what's going on there?
So, basically they just let's see, executive summary. I'm sorry, let me pull mine up here real
Well, I
quick.
that was a mistake to say that because there's actually a title on my reserve study that I'm also reviewing that's called executive summary. So they put on the first
Oh,
page. I mean, let's say what is the bullet points of what is a reserve study? Well, I'll go into that, and maybe you can tell me what some other things that you gathered. But what you have is a bunch of common assets, right? So for you, the example you gave was a swimming pool. For where I live,
sure.
we have a swimming pool. We have roofs. We have commonly shared roofs. That's not going to be true for you. So an association has to budget for the plaster for the pool. You have to budget for when the roofs come due in 25 years or 30 years. You have to budget for all these things into an account, which we call reserves. So each of these things is going to have um, an expected life. Life expectancy of a roof could be 25 to 35
Hmm.
years. What was it for plaster? Did you look on the swimming pool thing?
So on the swimming pool, it was, well, what's interesting was because my study, when I pulled it, they don't do they do a study every other year. So we did one in summer of last year, and I think at that time, I mean, there was no discussion. So I do occasionally attend an HOA meeting, so I think I might be strange. I don't know. But there was no discussion around it until it wasn't until just like November of this year, I
Mhm.
feel like. And I don't know if it was people towards the end of the swimming season noticed the, um, you know, and so then they began to discuss it. But when I look on the reserve study from June, it says that it's still got 2 more years or three
Mhm.
more years. So this is an unforeseen, although, the interesting part about the reserve study for my HOA is we're actually in a surplus. So I guess
Mhm.
it's our reserves, they have like set a minimum of what our reserves should be by the end of the year or, on this particular year. And then they kind of lead it out for 5 years. But right now we're 151%. So we're, like it's a fine time to be replacing the pool. It's funny because as with before the reserve study, so going back to owner Luke, so many Lukes, owner Luke, they started the work on the pool, but it kind of like they went in and stripped out all of the plaster in the
Mhm.
pool. But that was like right before Christmas. So it's been that way for, like they've closed the pool area for 20 days. I started wondering before you sent me the homework on the reserve study. I started wondering. Sorry, I keep calling it homework, but whatever. Before we agreed on the document to discuss, it was, I was started wondering. Well, maybe we ran out of money. So like I don't know, like somebody was just like, yeah, we need to do this, and then they were like, yeah, here you got to cut us a check. It's gonna be, I think one of the interesting parts about a reserve study is, exactly to your point, is it's trying to predict those future costs. Here you have everybody paying into an HOA at X amount of fees. Do we need to increase that for future costs, or are we in a deficit, meaning we're going to need to make up for some of that because we might have some unforeseen, like I'll be interested now that I have more of an education. I'll be interested to go to my next HOA meeting to see or to see if that some of that's discussed.
I think
Because
you're going to show
certainly,
up and say, "Hey, we're 151% funded. Why isn't this plaster done yet?"
right, what's the holdup? Right, yeah, who's taking money from the account? Honestly, no. Uh,
Allegations of fraud already.
well, see, yeah, that's the other thing that's so I'm sort of pro HOA but anti HOA at the same time as an owner. Like I don't like the monthly. I do like the shared, the problem is I do like the shared community thing. I don't want to have my own pool.
Mhm.
Frankly, it's nice to just pay a monthly and have somebody else maintain a location. I can go enjoy it. I don't need to be the one responsible for, man, don't talk to me about maintaining a pool. My brother has a pool in Texas. He says it's the worst thing he's ever had. I keep telling him to just farm it out. You just need to pay. But anyways, like the reserve study, so we have money. So I don't know what the holdup is, but I'll be interested. It could be just issues with whoever we contracted to do it or something, I imagine. But it was interesting to look at the sort of forward outlook of reserve study. You're absolutely right. It's sort of like we're going to have these costs, and we need to plan for them. And I don't think a lot of owners, like myself, I'm not doing this around my house. Like it made me think, like, man, it'd be beneficial if I were to just take note of this in
Are
my
you
my
are
own
you
personal reserve study.
yeah,
Like,
well, are you saving for a roof?
what's the aging on no, I'm
Yeah.
not saving for a roof, so I'm doing a terrible job.
And that's
I'm
why
just
we have
waiting.
home equity lines of credit because most people don't, right? They need to get a
Right.
loan or something like that to pay for the roof or whatever other. I mean, but the nuts and bolts of a reserve study, you hit on one of those things when you said that you're 151% funded, and that is one of the items you can get right on that very first page of the reserve study, and it tells you so you as a buyer can know how well funded the reserves are for projects such as roofs, swimming pools, whatever it is just by looking at the first page. You don't even have to get into the rest of the budget, and that's the value, one of the valuable things.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah, they present you the numbers, pretty upfront, and they even explain. They go over some of the guidelines. What's interesting is, well, and this was interesting. You said every other month, but in the guideline document, it says you can go up to 3 years without doing a physical assessment. So
Oh,
let's
wow.
just go back to there are two things, in the reserve guideline document
Mhm.
or that they put out. There it just basically says there's a physical assessment and then there's a monetary assessment of
I'll
and
bet
it
there's
said
some
that
Well,
you
I'll
can
bet
get
there's some
paid.
variety in that rule, whether it's every 3 years or two
Sure.
years, because I know it for some reason at our HOA right now, they keep saying it's every other years, and maybe it's just specific to the size of association or to the type of association, like condo units. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't look into that. What was interesting is even well, so like these are the guidelines they put out and they recommend, and there's civil code about it. But even the guidelines kind of mention that there might be smaller associations who aren't compliant. Like
Mhm.
that was my other question is like, who's the FBI of reserve studies? Who's going out there kicking some doors? I'm looking for an HOA, like there's nobody. But it is good in due diligence. And I feel like I don't know, that goes back to the sales and education. Like while I feel like when you become a homeowner, this is something that nobody was like, hey man, look out for your reserve study when you bought your house. I just
Well,
wanted you to be aware of that.
I mean, that's a good point. I have the habit now as a real estate agent to look at all the reserve studies. I actually enjoy it. So if any of my agents or anybody out there wants me to read their reserve study, I volunteer for the job because I enjoy seeing how the other associations are doing. But I had a transaction one time, and I've talked about this on this podcast in the past. I had a client one time who their association where she was thinking about buying in Agora Hills. had all kinds of issues. There was litigation and there was all these other things. And then I read the reserve study, and they were underfunded by, I don't know, it was the reserve study that said that every single homeowner was going to have a special assessment. So if there is
Wow.
news of if there's any discussion in the HOA meeting minutes of a special assessment, which is an assessment that goes beyond the regular monthly assessment. Maybe you pay $75 a month, maybe you pay $400 a month, whatever that regular assessment is. If there is an emergency, the HOA has the authority to levy a special assessment. And that was the case, at least per the discussion in the minutes for this one association, because they had so many financial woes. They were heavily underfunded. And as a representative of as agent for my client, we were able to negotiate a reduction in the price because of these problems, and because it was expected that within the next several months she was going to have to pay $5,000. We reduced the price of the property $5,000.
Nice. Like, no, that's a prime example. Actually, while you were talking through it, it made me think of just like I don't want to mince real estate things, but it's like kind of like an easement a little bit. I mean, like you're buying into something that you're essentially buying into this group, this homeowners association. And so yes, if there's liabilities, then absolutely. I mean, you made the right call. There should be some compensation or some, you know, it goes both ways. Whether
Mhm.
you're the seller, you should be, know that they're going to be just like you're going to be dodging that $5,000 bill.
Yeah.
Someone else is going to be paying it, and you're the
Well,
current owner, so it's going to be on you. But I don't know. I don't know. I think they're very valuable. I feel like now that I know more about them, I didn't, rewind 48 hours, and I was just a baby, just just
what
coming out of the womb, just
the other practical thing I would add about the reserve study is what else can you do to understand the financial strength of your prospective HOA where you might be buying, or even if you're just an owner and you want to understand it. You look at the reserve study, and you compare it to the budget, and you just make sure that they're following. It's basically an outline for how much money the HOA should be collecting every single month to make sure that the reserves are properly funded as they're intended to be, so that you can get the roof on time, so you can get the swimming pool fixed on time, and not have a reduction in value for all these problems that the HOA has. So if the budget is not properly funding the reserves for these various anticipated projects, then you know you have troubles. But if you see that your monthly assessment and the budget is not following the recommendations of the reserve study, then you got to have caution.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a good it's just a good thing. It's a good measure of what to be careful from. It's another pitfall, just like the reasons why you'd, you know, assess a property. You'd have somebody come and check it out. And I feel like now that I know more about them, I can see the value in them. I'm sorry that I didn't know about them before. I just signed on with this group. How crazy am I? I'm a terrible, but I think that's a lot of consumers. I don't even remember, I bought my house in 2015. I don't even remember. So, but I don't remember my agent didn't say anything. Granted, we'll get into that. She's not great, but that's neither here nor there. She was not helpful, but that's all right. So it was. I don't remember them mentioning this at all. Granted, the development, I think they only had like 46 units out of 90. At that point. So that's the other thing about the reserve report. They kind of talk through some of your subdivisions, and almost I wondered, see, there's an easement on the other side of my property, and I think they're either going to own it, or like the hopes are they would develop more.
Mhm.
And so then it'd be like we're going to have more, like
Oh yeah, more common area.
more common area, or more, are they going to be part of the same association? But I didn't find any of that in the actual study, because I was like always speculating. i'm
Well,
i'm
what would
sure
be the
there's
purpose of that property? Is it for more units, or is it going to bring income when they do?
yes, so there's along the, well, I think it's for for more, it would be more properties along this. So we have a couple of cul-de-sacs that
Hmm.
end with this road is an easement, even though it's the end of a block.
Hmm.
There is property on the other side that I'm assuming they would try to bring
Yeah.
into as our community, but I have no idea. But I was wondering if the reserve study would show me that. It doesn't, but it does exactly what you described, describes the fiscal strength of your group. The other thing was I wanted to talk about, you talked about being funded or underfunded. I feel like mine's a little overfunded. When I
Yeah.
realized we were at 150%, it was like, are we charging too much? Like at the same time that I think it's good, I want to be a good steward and I want to make sure we have the funds we need in an emergency or in, like things happen. Like that anybody who's a homeowner, an agent, whatever, like stuff happens.
Hmm.
But having too much, if we rewind, I used to live in, there's some apartments in here in Moore Park, condos, and the HOA fee was astronomical. It was like $400 a month or
Hmm.
something. And I found out later from my neighbor because I was like, I don't. We have a pool. It was an okay pool. Like all our common areas, we're just like, why are we paying so much money? And it wasn't impacting me. I was a renter, so I didn't
Hmm.
own the place, but I always like thought of it about my
You're
I
already
guess
hating on HOAs because of that.
right, because of this, I came in already hating HOAs. But yeah, and it turned out they had a number of years of like a surplus, but it was being nicked. Somebody was, taking the cream off the top, and so it ended up in that they were in such a deficit that now everybody, you're still on the hook to maintain those common properties. It's not like we can just disband one day and be like, well, the pool's whoever gets to own the pool, or whoever's
Yep.
got the biggest guns that day, or like it's so you're kind of always on the hook to this group, and so you want it to be well managed, but I don't know, how do you, where's the line? Because like what's the percentage too much where I'm like there might be too much money in here that I'm worried someone
If
might get greedy.
Yeah, if you have more money, if you're collecting more money than is actually budgeted for or reserved for, or however you want to look at it, then you got to lower the dues. There's no other, you know.
Right.
So I mean, that's something that your board of directors should be doing for an HOA. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and so yeah, no, and that was like that's key or top at the top of my reserve study. They mentioned that they're like we are funded, at the end of this fiscal year, which was just last, they were like we're at 153% funded at this date, and you're like, well, that's a great number, but at the same time, should I be worried about you? The other
On
thing,
on the other hand, though, you had that swimming pool that already needed some plaster work, and it was
true.
not even time for it yet, quite.
Right. According to the study and the remaining life, we should have still had 2 more years. So, that was interesting. I think the reserve study, if not teaching us the value of a good HOA, would also teach us the value of we should probably do these with our own things,
Yep.
cars, like which if you're a good accountant, you're doing, but normal people are not. One of the other things about the guideline that I liked was it kind of mentioned up front. Unfortunately, some owners do not realize, I wrote it down because I thought it was hilarious. Some owners do not realize their community responsibilities or the fact that damage to common area property can result in direct cost to all homeowners through assessments.
Special assessments.
Yeah, through special assessments.
Yep.
And I just thought, what a valuable thing that we didn't, the reserve study. I think it is a value for both a buyer and a seller, and to understand them as an agent is a great selling point. I think it's hard to convey that information, and I feel like there's a lack of education around it. So that's sad, but
Well,
um,
after today, there's a ton of education now because you and I just discussed it for an hour. We're going to publish this thing, and then everybody's going to get to listen up.
right. Well, we'll see. But I apologize if we impacted your listening. That everything went down. Everyone's like, "Man, this used to be a professional podcast." Then they invited Luke.
Well,
So
thanks for joining me. I think it added quite a bit to have you here today, and I think we ought to do it again.
Yeah, we should definitely do it. It was fun. So thanks for having me on, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Luke.
Should we go off of video? Is this just audio? Are people going to watch this?
People could watch this.
All right.
So
Wild.
Luke,
I gotta get better lighting then. Geez, I need to turn this way or something.